Thank you. That was an excellent. I couldn't have asked for a better intro because that's basically exactly how I feel. Um, Thank you all for being here. I realize it's the last slot before the keynote, and we're all probably a little bit sleepy. But this is a topic I'm very excited about, so I hope I can get you just as excited to keep us all a little bit awake. Um, so my name is Pauline. You may have seen me at the Git Talk if you were in the Portaton yesterday. I am a freelance software engineer. I'm currently working in the autonomous aviation space. I am also a mom of a 2.5-year-old who you may have also seen walking around last night, actually. It was very cute. Clicker, yes. My hobbies include knitting, video games, long walks on the beach, and making segues to the topic at hand, which brings me to the bright and exciting future of the decentralized web. So before we get started, I want to get some sort of go through some definitions that are going to be relevant. So first of all, what does decentralized mean? What does it mean for a system to be decentralized? Well, if you read the talk description, you would know that this is not a blockchain talk. If you were expecting a blockchain talk, I'm very sorry. This is your cue to go to something else that might interest you more. But this is not a blockchain talk, and I had to add that little disclaimer because the term decentralized has, in recent years, kind of become synonymous with everything crypto and Web3, NFTs, and even the metaverse for unknown reasons. But something doesn't have to be decentralized, blockchain to be decentralized. And inversely, something that is made with blockchain technology isn't necessarily decentralized. Because all it means for something to be decentralized is that it's the opposite of centralized. Thank you, Clippy, that's very useful. So what does it mean for a system to be centralized? Well, something is centralized if it is managed in one central place. So that can be in terms of like data storage or computation or hosting, anything really. So it can be on all these different levels, which also means that a system can be partially centralized, but not completely. If you take one tiny side road to blockchain, last one, of course, blockchain technology is generally seen as a decentralized technology because it's about a distributed ledger, right? So all these transactions are validated in a distributed way. But then if you look at crypto exchanges, where all these wallets are managed and identities are tied to wallets and money is kind of stored, that's all managed in a central place, right? So that part of it can be centralized, even though the transactions are not. And so then decentralized is the opposite. A system that is decentralized is managed by multiple independent nodes. And by independent, I mean they don't exert any control over each other. And if we look at Mastodon, for instance, which a lot of you will probably know, Mastodon can be run independently by one node. So that's its own instance of Mastodon with its own set of users, its own set of moderation rules, but users on one, it's still connected to the rest of the nodes on the server or on the network. So users on one instance of Mastodon can still connect with and follow people on other instances, right? Then there's one other term that's often kind of used interchangeably, but there's a slight nuance there. There's a slight difference in meaning, so I want to kind of cover it because it is relevant, and that is the word distributed. This clicker is all the way at the back there. So when a system is distributed, it means it's spread out. So the nodes, it's still a network of different nodes, but they're not necessarily independent, but they usually share a responsibility. So that could be, again, data storage. So if there's a lot of data to be stored, and it's too much to store on one central server, you might choose to have a distributed system of data storage servers. It could also be that there's some really heavy computational task that needs to be achieved. So then you give this distributed network of nodes shared responsibility to achieve a certain task. One really big example that we all know is DNS. So DNS maps URLs to IP addresses, right? You type in a URL or well, a domain name rather, into your browser, and then name servers, a network, big distributed network of name servers, is responsible for mapping that domain name to an IP address so that your browser knows which server to go to, essentially. So if you've ever done your DNS settings for your own website, you'll have put in a name server, right? So that's basically you telling it that this name server is the one that knows how to map your domain name to an IP address. And that's a distributed system because it's responsible for mapping literally all the world's web traffic to IP addresses. So that's a massive task. So then you need a kind of a distributed system to take care of that. Now that we've got those definitions sorted out, I want to take you to the story of back to the story of the past of the web and also the present of the web and where it fits in to these kind of terms. So it all started in 1989 when Sir Tim Berners-Lee, together with other people and building on other foundational knowledge, of course, invented the World Wide Web. And you'll see this is a little historical logo that was created by one of his colleagues at CERN that I don't know if you can all see it very well in the back, but it has a little slogan, says, "Let's share what we know." And that was really the concept. It was a knowledge sharing tool, and specifically, the goal was to be able to share knowledge with people who traditionally maybe wouldn't have had access to knowledge. So either people, who live under repressive governments, for instance, or people who economically, traditionally wouldn't be able to go to universities. So it was really supposed to be a tool for empowerment, for equity. Is really quite a political tool. That was the intention. And so it was built on three main foundational technologies, one of which was personal computers, another one of which was networking, and then another one of which was hypertext documents. So the idea was to take all these personal computers and connect them on a big global network and have them act as servers and expose hypertext documents to each other, right? And then you have a hypertext document that's served by one machine, and it will have a little hyperlink, and you can click through to the next hypertext document, which could be on the same node on this distributed network, which is what it is, or which is what it was, really. And then it would take you to this, you could explore more information as you went. And an example that really still reflects this very well, this concept, is Wikipedia. Who hasn't gone down a Wikipedia information hole? That was the whole idea. You discover knowledge as you go, but you do it through this big distributed network of all these different nodes serving up information for you to discover. So then it was unleashed on the world. And it was a huge catalyst, of course, to the information age, which is the one that we're in now, where information is a huge part of the economy. The modern economy rests on information, basically. And Sir Tim Berners-Lee, as you can see by his title, was knighted for this invention. So then it was unleashed on the world, and pretty soon all these little companies started popping up, offering small amounts of web space, because of course, for the average user, it wasn't so straightforward to host their own web server and start hosting these hypertext documents. So an easy way is to go to one of these companies, get some web space, and start hosting your personal homepage. So there was a lot of personal homepages, and it led to people learning about HTML, marquees, animated GIFs, all that good stuff, and it led to glorious internet culture and also awful internet culture. And a lot of useful information and a lot of not so useful information. And over time, people started finding ways of pushing the boundaries of this technology. So it started finding little features that they could exploit to make things more dynamic. So for instance, the XML HTTP request feature in Internet Explorer was discovered by people to enable you to make AJAX requests, so you can load data into your pages dynamically. Of course, famously, Erasmus invented PHP, which initially stood for personal homepage, as many of you will probably know. And the goal of that was really for a way to manage his own personal homepage by interacting with the server. So he would interact with the server, and then that would affect what his homepage would look like. And then he kept extending that and adding things like, also being able to communicate with a database so that you could persist things and show that on your homepage and stuff. And just grew and grew in popularity. And here we all are with our nice jobs and stuff. So it all became, it went from serving these hypertext documents to kind of applications, right? Users interacting with servers. And you can already peep him here. Tom was kind of the result of that, the cusp. He was on the cusp of that. If you had MySpace, who doesn't know who Tom is? Oh, no clue? Nice. Okay, a few hands, but most of you know who Tom is. So Tom, if you were on MySpace, you would have known him as everyone's friend, because he was the founder of MySpace, and he was your first friend. It's very wholesome, very cute. But so he was kind of on the cusp of what we've come to call Web 2.0, which was the social web. So the social web was where people, instead of hosting their own personal homepages, would sign up to applications, and these applications would enable you to message each other, add each other as friends, and things like that. So all pretty fun and innocuous at the time. But pretty quickly, and if you were doing a degree in the mid-2000s to late 2000s like I was, you would have already started hearing this buzzword, big data. So big data, we all know this term now, of course, but at the time, I remember I was being taught that, and we didn't really fully understand why yet, we just knew it made money. So we were taught that if you're gonna start building web applications, what you wanna do is just gather as much behavioral user data as you can, even on data points that you might not think are very relevant, because you never know how they might be useful, basically. And it was very, very fruitful. It became the business model, and it still is the business model. Data is literally more valuable than gold. So big data is when we became the product, right? And the same guy who created that nice little logo before, Sir Tim Berners-Lee's colleague at CERN, Robert Caillot, he had some concerns even at the time. There's a quote from him where he's saying that his concern was that the client is the advertiser. So you as a user of these applications are not the client. They don't care about you as a customer, essentially. The client is the advertiser. You are the product. And what's worse is you don't have a contract with them. So basically what he was saying is you have this dynamic with them where you're the one making them money. You're offering yourself up on a silver platter, basically, and there's no agreement there as to the extent to which you can be used as a product. So he was very concerned about that. But we, as the average users, weren't very concerned about that at the time. So this was very lucrative because everyone was on social media. It still is, of course. But this has made those kind of early adopters and those early social companies wildly successful, and they started gobbling up all these other startups and gobbling up the competition. And so they started accessing basically all of our user data in central places. So like you saw before on the previous slide, you saw Facebook and Instagram. I think Instagram was bought at a point where they were only something like 10 employees or something, very small. Huge impact on the amount of data that Facebook has, for instance. Okay, so what's happened now is what was supposed to be a distributed network has become more and more centralized. So in 2018, FANG, what we now know as FANG, so the acronym Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, had control over 57% of all web traffic. That's in 2018. And all of this has had very serious consequences, reaching far beyond the realm of feeding us advertisements. For instance, just in terms of energy consumption, from 2018 to 2020, Fang's energy consumption tripled, leaving entire countries in the dust. So here you'll see that Peru, Portugal, and, well, Greece is slightly cut off, but they're behind Fang in terms of energy consumption. Fun fact, billions of liters of water per year are used to cool the servers in one giant Google data center. And keep in mind that also these data centers, some of them tend to be built in places that are very drought prone, so that's also not great. On top of that, this data is now being sold to much more nefarious ends than showing you advertisements. For instance, for mass surveillance, not just by your own government, but also other nation states that are spying on you, essentially. And personas of us are being created to do things like swing elections and deliver meticulously targeted propaganda to our kids. And also to share propaganda with us to incite hatred to the point of actual genocide. And all of these are real. All of these are real, and they're just a smidgen of what I could have pulled up. So very, very far-reaching consequences. To the point that Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the same Sir Tim Berners-Lee who invented the web, has now said that his invention is no longer used as a source for good, as a force for good. I don't know why that was. So in 2018, he posted an open letter to the public, basically warning us about that, and that his invention had been perverted, and that it's been weaponized against us. And that sounds very intense, but if you look at the examples before and many others, you'll know that it's true. And now you might think, Pauline, this isn't the bright and exciting future that you were talking about, is it? This doesn't sound bright and exciting at all. And you're right, it doesn't sound very bright and exciting. But so far, we've only talked about the past and the present. And this talk is about the future. And for the future, Sir Tim Berners-Lee has a bold plan to flip the web the right side up again. So this plan is called the SOLID project. And SOLID stands for social linked data. And it has a few different components, one of which is a specification. So that's the social linked data specification. That is meant to represent concepts from online life and also real life. And the other component is the pods that sounds very vague. But pods are essentially just web servers, and the aim is that every user will have their own web server for data storage, so for storing their personal data. Not just personal data, but just any behavioral data. Okay, so the aim is for none of this data to be stored on these external servers anymore, but to be stored on your own pod, and then you expose that data to the apps that you use. So let's take, so this is your pod, yes, hi. So that's your little web server. And let's say you're using a music streaming service. So this music streaming service, you give it read access to your name for your profile and to your address because you have a subscription with them, so they need your billing address, okay? And in turn, it gets write access to your pod to write your listens and your favorites to your pod. Now let's say you're also using an event app. So this event app also has read access to your name for your profile and to the city out of your address. So not your entire address, but the city out of your address. Then it also has read access to your listens and favorites that have been written to your pod by the streaming service or any other service that you're also using that's also writing to this particular object from the spec, basically. So based on those read permissions, that app can then recommend concerts in your area. So you're getting the same value that you had before, but they're not storing any of your behavioral data. That's the concept. Okay? Then another bit of added value, so this is the same value for the user. Another bit of added value that this would bring is interoperability. So let's say your address changes, You can then change your address either by managing your pod directly and changing your address, or with an app that you may have given right permissions to your address. And then once you update that, all the applications that have read access to your address will be updated. So you only have to update it in one place. So it aims to kind of give you control back over your data and keep it so you can keep it close to you, but also add some value for you as a user to make it more attractive for you as well. Because what you can then also do, for instance, is if you cancel your subscription with the streaming service, they won't need your billing address anymore. So you remove access, stuff like that. And I think this idea is really exciting and really promising, because if I think about my online life, since a preteen, I was on the internet since I was a preteen. And I've made posts online when I was 12, put my personal data online, and it's all out there somewhere. I've had Twitter since 2009. I have no idea what's on my Twitter on 2009. And what's worse, now that Elon Musk has bought it, he's made the API no longer free and is charging pretty extortionate amounts to use the API. So a lot of people, what they were doing was automatically deleting their tweets. You can't do that anymore now. So I really like the idea of being able to just take all that information, you have it close to you, and you just cut off access to whatever. Especially having a kid now, I really am kind of fearful for the idea that when she starts going on the internet, she's 2.5 now, that all of her photos are online, everything that she's ever posted is online, and she has no control over it. Once it's out there, it's going to be duplicated into Affinity, sold off, it's out there forever. We all know this. But this could be a solution to that. So I think it's really promising. It's still very early days, but it's very promising. And you can already get your own pod. There's a few options. So one option is to host your own, which for the average user, it definitely has some technical overhead, because you're basically just running a web server. So you have to take into account everything that you would have to take into account if you're running a web server, right? It's also not the most user-friendly yet, but they're supposedly working on that. I don't know what that means and what the time frame there is, but I think that most people are hosting their pods in a similar way that you used to host your home pages on things like GeoCities. So you're still hosting it in the cloud, essentially, but the difference is that you can extract your pod and move it anywhere else whenever you please, basically. So there's two pretty popular options. One is the hosted community server. So that's my web ID on there. It's still a little bit wonky, I think, user interface-wise. But there's also Inrupt, and Inrupt is the company that Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, put some respect on his name. He started this company in 2017 to kind of be able to propel the Solid project forward, and to kind of also offer enterprise solutions, and be able to raise funding. So up until now, so from 2017 until now, they've raised almost up to 50 million euros, I think. Euros or dollars or pounds? Anyway, 50 million. I think with numbers that big, it probably doesn't really matter that much anyway. So pretty significant amounts already. And also, fun fact, the Flemish government, so that's the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, has already said they were going to invest in a pod for each of their citizens. So all of their citizens are going to get a pod to manage their government affairs, and whatever other affairs they want to manage through their pod, of course. And a little closer to home, the NHS has also bought into the idea. So patients are going to be able to manage their medical information on these pods, which is very attractive, of course, with that kind of data, because there's little more sensitive than medical information, right? So very exciting. If you want to read about more options to get your own pod, there's a little pop-up with a QR code. I don't know if they're big enough for the back. I sure hope so. Does that work? Can I get an eye from the back somewhere? Middle is good. Okay, back is pretty good. Sweet, because I've got a few more in there, so that's very helpful. All right, let's dismiss this pop-up and move on to the Fediverse. So hands up if you've heard of the Fediverse. Keep your hand up if you are on Mastodon. That's pretty much the same amount of people. And that doesn't surprise me, because Mastodon is by far the most used and most widely known Fediverse app out there today. And that is because Elon Musk recently bought Twitter for reasons, and a lot of people started making an exodus. Specifically, a lot of technologists, a lot of privacy-conscious people, a lot of journalists started making their way out and finding decentralized alternatives. And the Fediverse is an interconnected kind of network of federated applications. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, so federation, another fun definition. I'm going to try to explain federation with a few examples, 2 examples. So we already knew about Mastodon, right? So Mastodon is a decentralized microblogging platform like Twitter. You can blog by means of posting very small messages. And it's set up in a way that it's many independent nodes on a network. So one node is an independent instance of Mastodon, and you can join an instance that interests you, but that doesn't mean that you're limited to that instance. So you can still follow people on other instances, right? Now let's take another Fediverse app, Write Freely. So less popular, but still fairly popular. So Write Freely is a decentralized blogging platform, and it's kind of a clean blogging platform. So the aim is to be able to blog in a kind of a distraction-free environment. So very clean interface, black text on a white background, no likes, no comments, no claps, nothing like that, just clean blogging. And it's set up exactly like Mastodon in the sense that there are instances of this application, and you can join an instance, but you can still follow other people. Where federation becomes really interesting is in the fact that both of these use the same protocol called the ActivityPub protocol. So ActivityPub, the protocol, is a little bit reminiscent of this solid specification that we were talking about before. It represents concepts from social media, so like profiles and posts and likes and things like that. And the thing is, what makes this so fun is, okay, so let's say my mom likes to share her cookie recipes and she likes to use Write Freely for it. She has an account on WriteAs, which is a Write Freely instance. She writes her posts there, and Write Freely uses the same object, ActivityPub object, as Mastodon uses for its toots. Yes, that's what they're called. They're called toots on Mastodon. So they're both using the note object in ActivityPub, which means that through this protocol, if my mother has enabled federation, I can follow her on Mastodon, but she is not on Mastodon. I can follow her on Mastodon, and her posts will show up as toots on my timeline. So that's really interesting. And that's one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, because what a lot of people think, especially in the context of Twitter and Mastodon, they think, oh, here's a Twitter clone. Oh, here's a Reddit clone. There's all of these different clones, right? But they're decentralized. And a lot of people, I don't think, are aware what this federation means in terms of this. Because decentralization to the average user doesn't really mean much, right? But this is a completely different way of sharing content, because now you can follow your friends and family even if they decide to use a different application that you're not using. So, I mean, everyone over 25 here probably will find it relatable that you have a little bit of FOMO because you hear all these kids on TikTok are making really fun content, but personally, I don't really get TikTok very much. But it'd be nice if I could still follow that content and just stay on my own little app. So that's really interesting to me. Another very interesting it's not new, but another different way of sharing content is a thing called IPFS. So IPFS is partially a protocol. As you can see here, IPFS : / reminds you of HTTP, right? It stands for Interplanetary File System, which is just the cutest name. I love it. But it is partially meant to replace HTTP. So it's partially a protocol, but it's also a peer-to-peer file sharing network. So a bit like what you're used to from like BitTorrent, for instance, right? Where there's you're looking for a file, and it's hosted by many different peers, and then you request that file, and then all those peers kind of come together and put bits together, and then you have the file. So that's the idea. But so it's also a browser protocol. So instead of HTTP, you put this in, and this is natively supported by, I don't know if anyone's using Brave, the browser. Yeah, a few people, a few nods. Also, if you're using Firefox or Chromium, it has an extension to support IPFS. And so what happens is a resource is not hosted by one server. It's hosted by many peers. So it's chunked up, cryptographically hashed, and then based on this hash, a content identifier is created, so a CID. And so you take that COD, and that is how you access the file, and then the network goes and gets all these different chunks from nodes on the network and serves you that. What's also fun is that this CID, because it's based on a content hash, when the content changes, so does the CID. So if you have a certain CID, you are guaranteed to have get that specific version and not a different version. But you can still also ensure that you get the latest version through a DNS link. So in a similar way that you have the domain name mapping to an IP address, you can have a readable address pointing to the freshest CID, basically, so that you can be sure that you have the latest version of a specific file. And what's very nice about this is that it's resistant to censorship, because it's not hosted on one server. A government can't just come over to your house and go, hey, take this down, and do like a takedown request, because there's plenty of other peers that are also hosting the same content, right? And that is becoming increasingly important, because as the web has centralized more and more, governments have started restricting access more easily, right? So famously, Russia has blocked Facebook and Twitter at the beginning of the invasion in Ukraine to stop people from reading fake news about the war, according to them. Then also Iran has been doing this for a while now, restricting access to Facebook and websites like that. But now, after the recent political upheaval, they've even started considering blocking all non-domestic internet, which is unprecedented levels of censorship, basically. But it's not just these kind of what you would think are really repressive governments. It's basically every government. So here's Poland is one example, but Norway also, the US, probably your governments as well. Basically, every government is participating in some level of internet censorship, usually after some sort of political upheaval, after specific campaigns, in response to activists organizing. Why? Because they can now, because it's increasingly easier, because you only have to block specific centralized entities, and because they know that the internet is an excellent tool for people to organize. Make no mistake, the internet is a very political tool. It was intended that way as well. So that's why they restrict access, because they know it's a tool and they can do it. And that's why I think it's so important for us as people, for you as people. If you ever need to organize, you need to be able to do that. And that's why it's important for us to start taking all of this apart now. So how can you get involved? Well, the easiest and most immediate way for you to get involved is to start using decentralized apps, to start using alternatives to these walled gardens. If you need some help with that, there's a really great website called switching.software that has a nice curated list of things that are, not all of them are federated or decentralized, but they're all either more ethical, more privacy conscious, and they're curated to also be user-friendly alternatives, which is also quite important. Another one is to teach people. I'm very excited about this subject, and that's why I wanted to give a talk about it. I think it's very important that we tell people the importance of decentralizing the web and what it actually involves, because it is very important. So tell everyone you know. Start building apps for the Solid project. Just try it out. Start building apps using the ActivityPub protocol, which for PHP developers is fairly accessible, because Kevin Dungla, I don't know if I'm sure some people know him. He's one of the founders of API Platform. He's also a core developer on a bunch of Symfony bundles. He's very into this decentralized web thing, and he has added support to API Platform for ActivityPub. So if you want to make an ActivityPub app as a PHP developer, that's a really good way to start. Then you can also contribute to the things that already exist. So especially the Solid project is very early days. This community server, one way to garner a lot of interest in these things is to have very user-friendly applications. So if you have a good feel for that, please do contribute. One thing I would love to see also is for the Solid project to start supporting ActivityPub. Because how great would it be if I were to be able to use Mastodon, but I don't give all my toots to some random person running an instance. I keep it on my own pod, and I use a federated app. I think that would be great. So there's also an issue open there, because it's a big issue, but it would be great if people started tackling that. But before you get started, I just want to say one more thing. There's this thing called DWeb, and it's kind of an umbrella community for everything decentralized web that has started up around the Internet Archive, who is very interested in remaining existent. So they're really looking into this peer-to-peer hosting to ensure the archive's existence. But it's become kind of a global community around the decentralized web, and they have a very specific aim, and that is to become a web with many winners and to return to the original vision of the World Wide Web. Okay, so they acknowledge that a technology isn't necessarily a solution to a societal problem, as we've seen, but it can also aggravate societal problems. So what they're saying is we have to be very conscious. We have a chance to do this, to have a do-over, but we have to be very conscious of how we do it. So they've created a set of principles. I'll go through them very quick, because I think, we have 10 minutes total. So they're divided in a few, less or more? Oh, more. Oh, great. Okay, I'll be really slow. Okay. Okay, great. So they're divided in a few main kind of topics. One of them is the technology for human agency. So the purpose of technology should be for human agency, meaning that the web and any other type of technology should be a tool, a communication tool for peer-to-peer, person-to-person communication, not through hierarchical power structures, and not through like hierarchical monitoring and control. So it should be peer-to-peer. The technology should serve people as a community communication tool. Second, distributed benefits, meaning that the benefits that are being reaped from a technology should go to the people participating in that technology, or, well, the community at large, and not to a few early adopters, not to a few tech giants. And that, I think, is what we've been seeing in the I'm a bit of a crypto skeptic, and it's partially because we've been seeing in the crypto space, it started with this kind of similar idealism, right, of wanting to decentralize things and wanting to dismantle power structures. But what it's become of late has it's really become disproportionately about wealth acquisition and about speculation. And you're seeing that a lot of these early adopters have become ridiculously wealthy and ridiculously powerful in the space. So then you got to wonder, aren't we emulating exactly the thing that we were trying to avoid, that we were trying to dismantle, right? So distributed benefits is a really crucial part of the set of principles. Wealth should flow to the community at large, not to the lucky few, basically. 3, mutual respect. So because all of this is decentralized, there is no central body that kind of mandates behavior and things like that. So if you are running an instance, for instance, you should have a clear code of conduct. You should organize in a transparent way so that users know that abuse won't be common. Everyone's beliefs are respected. You get what I mean. There's no room for abuse. Users can feel safe and confident that they will be treated with respect on these decentralized applications. Humanity. So the focus of the web should be on human rights. It should be on empowering people like it was. It should be about equity. So it should be empowering especially to those who have traditionally been oppressed. So we have to, instead of just building anything, we have to build with that in mind, and we have to build in mechanisms for harm reduction. We have to build in mechanisms that mitigate exploitation and abuse of people. And finally, ecological awareness. So when we build anything, we need to keep in mind resource management. We need to keep in mind the impact on the environment that our technology has. We also need to keep in mind things like the right to repair. People should, when they use something, should have some sort of agency over the technology that they use so that they can fix things instead of having to, after a while, throw something out and buy something new, because that also has an ecological impact, right? So that's basically, in a nutshell, the principles. If you want to read all of them, here's another QR code. This will take you to the DWeb website so you can read their principles. But again, I want to stress again that their mission is to go back to what the web was intended to be. These principles aren't new, and this is what Sir Tim Berners-Lee et al. Intended to create with the web. And he's actually very vocal about that. I'm not making that up. He's very vocal about that. So again, we have a chance at a do-over, and that is very possibly very bright and exciting. But we have to always remain critical for this to work. We always have to keep asking ourselves the difficult questions. That means that, as this starts to evolve and as you start learning and building things, be aware that you don't get too swept up in the excitement of something new, because then you're not critical anymore. You have to ask yourself the difficult questions like, does this particular technology have any disadvantages? Does this exciting new thing, idea that I have for something to build, does that in any way go against these principles? And then if it does, should I be building it at all? Should I maybe just let it go? So I think if we keep that in mind, then the future of the decentralized web can be much more bright and exciting than the dystopian dumpster fire that we have now. Thank you.
Wow. This was good, wasn't it? So we learned something new and opportunities. And so, who has questions?
So you talked about the distribution of files and making sure that they can't be blocked by repressive regimes. I'm not saying it's necessarily balancing, but what about the situations where it's like material which is harmful? And how do you stop that without also stopping the government, stopping things that they think are harmful?
Yep.
Is that something that's been discussed?
Yeah, it is. Although, and this is exactly why I'm saying we have to keep asking the difficult questions, because this is exactly the same concern that I have. So what happens is, basically, if you're hosting a piece of content, you can pin it if you want to keep it. So if you're a hosting peer who has discovered that they're hosting illegal content, you can unpin it, and then it gets garbage collected and nobody starts. But my issue with that is for the individual to kind of cushion themselves against doing anything illegal. It doesn't necessarily protect like the victims of for instance, revenge porn or child pornography or anything like that. And the thing is, they do think about it. So their solution to this basically is that you can the nodes are always very visible, so you can do takedown requests of the nodes. My concern is that this CID is very, how do I say it? If you have a URL, traditional URL posting to a file, of course it can be spread around loads. But if there's one URL that's been spread, one specific URL that's been widely spread, then it's only one takedown request and then that URL is gone. The data might still be hosted somewhere, but not so many people know about it. With the CID, you can do all these takedown requests, but you only need the one CID that's pointing to this content, you know? So I still feel a bit iffy about that myself as well.
What about the NHS keeping or putting records onto the pods?
Mm-hmm.
I assume they're going to also keep a copy as well, because I imagine end users might lose their pods, lose access, delete their own pods. I'm assuming it's going to be a duplication of data in that particular case.
From what I gather, the NHS has a contract with Inrupt, so it would be hosted by Inrupt, which I don't know how they handle duplication and things like that. But yeah, I don't think they're going to host the pods themselves, so it's all going to be Inrupt managing that, and I'm assuming that would stay there and you have full agency over it, but I'm not totally sure about how they handle that.
Anyone else?
It's basically two things. Like the first thing you kind of answered already, but maybe you want to elaborate more on that. You talked about censorship and all the problems that you have with state censorship, and I completely agree about that. But the flip side is content takedowns for things that you want to take down. But I basically answered that, and it's just one of the biggest problems I see with the whole Fediverse that this is not solved yet.
Yeah.
The second thing, maybe you know, with the concept of pods, you actually have a central place where a lot of data of an individual person is stored, even if you can freely choose where that data is stored, is a prime target for attackers. So security is very, very vital there.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see so many problems coming out of that if that pod is somehow corrupted.
Yep.
Is there something in the protocol in Solid or of Inrupt where they're trying to address that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I had the same concerns. I think the protocol is still, or the specification rather, is still lacking in a lot of ways. I don't think right now part of what is specified is that data is encrypted or anything like that, for instance. So I think it's still very much evolving. And there's still like a working group that's working on it. But I don't think at this point, probably that's defined enough for everyone to comfortably go, oh, this isn't going to be an attack vector for all of my personal data. On the flip side, what happens now is, I don't know, well, you're probably using Have I Been Pooned? Like most, yeah. So on the flip side, I don't know how many notifications you're getting, but I'm constantly being notified of data breaches. So yeah, it's a little bit of a, we're getting these data breaches now as well, But I agree that that if you're going to put all of your very sensitive personal data, I would also want to know that it's a little bit more security conscious. Yeah.
When it comes to the pods and storing our data, it seems pretty unlikely to me that Netflix are ever going to say, "Oh, no problem. Yes, we'll put all their stuff on the pods," or Google or Facebook. And ultimately, the real offenders are the Google, the Facebook, and the Netflix, and so forth. Is there a plan to, in some way, get it, move it along so that actually that can happen?
Yeah, so that's actually a big kind of point of resistance that they have now, is that it's much more challenging to find a completely new business model where there was basically a one size fits all business model for selling data, right? So it's quite difficult to convince these commercial parties that this is what they want to do, because that's their bread and butter. It's much easier to go for governments and medical institutions. So that's essentially what Erupt is doing now, is they are really approaching those people and trying to make the difference there, and hopefully then slowly get enough critical mass so that and also try to give added value for users over having their data stored with a third party, such as that interoperability. And they're hoping that the combination of that plus more people thinking about new business models will eventually turn it into something that is viable. But yeah, again, it's very early days, so I really hope we can find ways to make this a thing.
When it comes to this pod system, from what I understand, the idea is that I can have one pod where I store all my data, so I can then change like my address, and then it's populated to everyone consuming that. But obviously, if you have systems like where the NHS is providing a pod with my medical data, and then you've got some government doing this in another place, then I can see that obviously that results in multiple pods having data, which is kind of against the principle, right? So how would that affect adoption, and is there any kind of idea that they have to ensure that this doesn't happen, that you have data in 20 different pods, basically?
Well, the concept would be for it to not be a medical data pod. It's basically they're giving you a pod for their purpose of managing medical data, but for you it's supposed to be your pod essentially. So it's not, the concept is not like, oh, I have my pod here for medical data and I have another pod. It's really when you have a pod, that's your pod. I do have multiple pods now because I wanted to try different hosts, and I can also imagine a scenario where maybe you want to have like a different profile per activity, like one work pod and one. I could see that happening, but yeah, it's definitely not the idea that you're going to have a different pod for each purpose. Does that answer it? Ish.
Hi, I'm wondering what the recipe is.
The cookie recipe. Google speculaasrecept. And it's like the first allerhande recipe you can find. So, sorry, non-Dutch people.
Anyone else? There we go.
Huh? My mom also doesn't actually like to bake, so that was completely made up.
Hi. There's going to be a cost to running a pod, either to the individual, the person, organisation providing it. Is there any consideration to the risk of, say, a company like Google, which has got lots of infrastructure and could, say, host your pod for you in exchange for all the data inside of it to give you personalised ads and recommendations?
Well, I think if you go to the options list, you'll find that actually all the options list where they're hosted as well, and a lot of the options are actually hosted on AWS or Google Cloud. So that already is the case. I don't think it's going to be a deal of like, give me all of your data. I mean, I'd hope not. I guess anything is possible, but I don't think that that is going to happen. What is happening as like a business model for Interrupt right now is that you can have a free pod as a user with Interrupt. You don't have to pay for it, and their business model is really from the enterprise solutions that they have. So that is what they're doing. So I imagine it'd be something like that. Maybe the community server could run on donations. Who knows? But yeah. Does that make sense?
Anyone else?
Thanks for a great talk. I've had a lot of conversations with non-technical people where I get the response like, "Oh, but I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to worry about." How do you talk to non-technical people about this? Do you have good tips, good experiences? Anything you can share?
Yeah. So my boyfriend is actually the best. How do I say this? Now I won't say like. Well, a test subject. How do I not dehumanize him? Especially when I was writing this talk, obviously I was very excited and sharing stuff with him. So he tried this blogging platform and stuff because he liked just the value that gave him. He liked the idea of like just very plain, no algorithms, no ads. Like clearly you could have ads if you wanted to on your platform, but a lot of these things don't. So I think, and also with the federation concept, the whole cookie recipe thing, I think the added value there for the average user could be a selling point. The problem that I see with my test subject is that he'll then be attracted to the value that is given, but then when he starts using it, at this point, it's so bare bones and it's so, there's no capitalist commercial driving force to ensure that users, for instance, aren't, they're trying to convert users, so they're not being stopped by bad user interface and stuff like that. So you do see that a lot. So that's what I see now. Like there is added value for the average user, but then when they arrive on this platform, they'll be quickly turned off by it because of the state it's in now. But I think that's just an early tech symptom. I think the early web had the very same thing, and then solutions started popping up. So I really hope that's going to be the case in the future as well.
All right. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you.